The night Callum Fraser almost ruined his own life. He didn't even know it was happening. That's the thing about falling apart slowly. You don't notice until someone else sees it first. It was a Thursday in late October, the kind that comes in hard off Lake Ontario, the wind cutting through wool like it had a personal grudge. Callum had just left the Meridian Group's annual gala at the Fairmont Royal York, black tie, open bar, the usual performance of success, and he was standing on Front Street at 11:43 at night, unable to remember where he'd parked his car, unable to care, 3 glasses of scotch on an empty stomach, 5 months of 70-hour weeks, a divorce that had been finalized on a Tuesday afternoon with less ceremony than a dental appointment. He'd smiled through the gala. He was very good at that. The car pulled up before he'd even raised his hand. A silver Hyundai, a little road-worn, a pine tree air freshener swinging from the rear view. The window came down and a woman looked out at him. Not with the practiced neutrality of a professional driver, but with the measured calm of someone who had seen a lot and had learned not to be surprised. "Need a ride," she said. Her name, he would learn later, was Suzanne LaBelle. He got in without thinking. Later he couldn't explain why. He wasn't the type to get into strangers' cars. He had a driver he kept on retainer, a man named Gerald who wore the same gray fleece every day of the year. But Gerald had a family thing. He'd said so that morning, and Callum had said fine, he'd manage, and then he had not managed. And now he was sitting in the back of Suzanne LaBelle's Hyundai smelling like oak and single malt. "Where to?" she asked. He gave her his address in Rosedale. She didn't react the way people usually did when he said Rosedale. She just nodded and pulled out into traffic. The radio was low. Something instrumental, maybe CBC, he couldn't tell. The heat worked but not aggressively. The back seat had a small tear in the upholstery near the left door, repaired with electrical tape, in a way that was careful without being invisible. He noticed these things because he noticed everything. It was how his mind worked. It was probably why he hadn't slept a full night in 4 months. "You okay back there?" she asked, about 10 minutes in. "Fine," he said, a pause. "Okay." She didn't push. He appreciated that more than he could have said in that moment. They were stopped at a red on Jarvis when he noticed her knuckles. She had both hands on the wheel, which he found oddly reassuring. He was drunk enough to be grateful for careful drivers. And the knuckle of her right index finger had a piece of medical tape wrapped around it. A small thing. The kind of thing you did when you couldn't afford to stop working, when you cut yourself and wrapped it up and kept going. "Long shift?" he asked. He didn't know why. She glanced at him in the rear view. Her eyes were dark brown, a little tired, not unkind. "I drove for 6 hours before the app put me on this call," she said. "Usually I stop at 10, but my daughter has a field trip tomorrow and I forgot to send money." She said it without self-pity. It was just information. Callum sat with that for a moment. He thought about his Thursday, the gala he hadn't wanted to attend, the speech he'd given about cultivating excellence, the $90 glass of scotch he'd left half-finished on a cocktail table. "How old's your daughter?" he asked. 7, she said. "Her name is Mathilde. She goes by Maddie. She wants to be a marine biologist, in Ontario." "I know," Suzanne said, and he could hear the smile in it. "I didn't have the heart to tell her the nearest ocean is 12 hours away." He laughed. It was the first real laugh he'd had in, he didn't know how long. They turned onto his street. The house appeared at the end of the long drive, lit by the motion sensors, the kind of house that looked like it had been built to impress visitors and had succeeded in making its only resident feel like a guest. 6,000 square feet. 3 guest rooms no one slept in. A kitchen his ex-wife had renovated and then left. "This is it," he said, though she knew. The app had told her. He got out, steadied himself against the cold. He reached forward to pay and she shook her head. "Already tipped through the app," she said. He'd been going to give her cash on top, something significant, but he fumbled it, and she was already looking at her phone for the next call, and he felt suddenly and embarrassingly like he was taking up her time. "Thank you," he said, "for the drive, and for not talking too much." She looked up at him then, not the rearview mirror, actually turned and looked at him. She had a calm, direct way of looking at people. "Get some sleep," she said. "Whatever's keeping you up, it'll look different in the morning." He stood in his driveway and watched her taillights disappear around the curve at the end of the street. He stood there for a while after that, in the cold, not quite ready to go inside. He requested her again the next night. And the night after that. He knew it was unusual. His assistant, Philippa, noticed. Philippa noticed everything. She was terrifyingly competent and gave him one of her measured looks when his car service invoices crossed her desk, but she said nothing. Callum didn't explain himself because he didn't know how to explain it without sounding like what it wasn't. He just found the ride more bearable. Suzanne LaBelle drove the way she did everything else, it turned out, with a kind of steady efficiency that had nothing performative about it. She wasn't trying to be charming. She wasn't trying to impress. When he talked, she listened, really listened, not the way people listened to him at board meetings, cataloging what he said so they could respond strategically, but the way you listened when you were actually interested. Some nights they barely talked. She'd have the radio on and he'd look out the window and think, and it was the clearest his mind got all week. He learned things about her in small pieces, the way you learn things that matter. Not in a rush, but one detail at a time, accumulating. She was 38. She'd been born in Jonquière in the Saguenay and had moved to Toronto at 19 with a scholarship to study nursing. She'd graduated, worked at St. Michael's for 6 years, and then Maddie came and the father didn't stay, and the math of Toronto rent and hospital shifts and childcare didn't work the way she'd needed it to, so she'd picked up the rideshare work to cover the gaps. She still did occasional nursing shifts. She was registered, kept her certification current, but the flexible hours of driving made it possible to be home when Maddie needed her. "You gave up nursing?" he asked, one night on the Gardener. "I didn't give it up," she said. "I rearranged it. There's a difference." He thought about that for a long time. He thought about it during a board presentation the following week, while one of his vice presidents talked about optimizing resource allocation. And he sat there looking at the PowerPoint slides and thinking about a woman who had rearranged her entire professional life around a 7-year-old who wanted to study marine biology, and had done it without complaint, without bitterness, with just that matter-of-fact practicality that he found increasingly. He didn't have a word for it at first. Remarkable, maybe. Or honest. She was honest in a way that very few people in his life were anymore. He was attracted to her. He was honest enough with himself to admit that. But it wasn't the primary thing, or at least it didn't feel primary. What he wanted was harder to name. He wanted to be around someone who didn't want anything from him. In his world, everyone wanted something. His board wanted performance. His ex-wife had wanted him to be a different kind of person. His investors wanted certainty. His team wanted leadership. Suzanne LaBelle wanted $12.40 plus tip to drop him at his house in Rosedale, and that was it. He started asking for longer routes. He didn't tell her why. She figured it out around the 3rd week. "You're taking me through the beaches at 11 o'clock at night," she said. "When you live northwest of here, traffic, there's no traffic at 11, there might be." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "This costs you more, you know." "I know." Another pause. Outside, the lake was black and flat and enormous against the city lights. "Okay," she said. That was all. He told himself it was just company. He told himself he was going through a difficult stretch, and this was how he was managing it. With slightly longer car rides and conversations with someone who told him the truth without knowing who he was. But then one night she mentioned that Maddie had been sick, just a cold, nothing serious. And she'd sat up half the night with her, and her voice had that specific exhaustion in it that isn't just tiredness. It's the exhaustion of loving something that needs everything you have. And he felt something shift in the center of his chest, a movement of something that had been very still for a very long time. He recognized it. He just hadn't expected to feel it again. He would have gone on pretending, probably, for a good while longer. He was skilled at not acknowledging things. It was, in its way, a professional competency. But 3 weeks into what he'd started thinking of privately as their Thursday to Sunday arrangement, his phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Suzanne. He'd given her his direct number in the 2nd week, after her app crashed, and he'd been left standing in the rain on Bay Street like an idiot. She'd never called it. "I'm sorry to call this late," she said, and there was something careful in her voice, something she was working to keep level. "My car won't start. I'm at the grocery store on Bloor. I just finished a shift, and Maddie's at home with my neighbor, and I told her I'd be back by 2, and it's 2 already." "I'll come," he said. "You don't have to do that, I know." He was in his car, his own car, a black Range Rover he drove himself when he wasn't working, before she'd finished the sentence. He found her in the parking lot of the 24-hour Loblaws on Bloor West, standing beside a silver Hyundai with the hood up, in a down jacket and a scarf he would later learn Maddie had knitted for her, the ends uneven, the colors a chaotic mix of orange and green. She looked when she saw him pull in, like she wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or embarrassed. "I didn't expect you to actually come," she said. "I said I would. People say things." He got out and looked at the car. He was not a mechanic. He was not, in any meaningful sense, handy. But he had grown up with a father who'd believed a man should know his engine. And so he stood there in the November cold and looked at things and tested the battery with the kit he kept in the back of the Range Rover, and it was the battery. He had jumper cables. He always had jumper cables. His father's voice somewhere behind his sternum. "You always have jumper cables, Callum." It took 7 minutes. The Hyundai coughed and caught. Suzanne stood with her arms crossed, watching him. When the engine steadied, something went out of her posture, the tension she'd been holding for the past 40 minutes. The silent calculation of logistics and costs and what to do with Matty. "Thank you," she said. "Battery's going. You'll need to replace it before winter proper sets in." "I know. I was waiting until next pay cycle." He wanted to say something about that. He stopped himself. She wasn't asking him to solve it. She was stating a fact. "I'll follow you home," he said instead. "Make sure it holds." She looked at him steadily. "Callum." It was the first time she'd used his name like that. Not Mr. Fraser, not Sir, not even the slightly careful way she'd used it in the earlier weeks. Just his name, the way people used names when they were trying to say something difficult. "It's not a problem," he said. "I'm already awake." She followed him. He followed her. At 2:23 in the morning they pulled up in front of a semi-detached on Lansdowne, in a block of narrow houses with front porches, and she turned off her engine and sat there for a moment. He waited. She got out. He got out. "You want to come in?" she asked, and he could hear the complexity in it. It wasn't an invitation. Exactly, it was more like a question she was asking herself at the same time as she asked him. "No," he said. "Go to Matty. I'll see you Thursday." Something passed across her face that he couldn't fully read. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or something else. "Good night," she said, "and thank you." Really. He drove back to Rosedale through empty streets and felt more awake than he had in months. He told Philippa the following Monday that he needed a referral for a good mechanic, not for his car, for a 2018 Hyundai Elantra. Philippa looked at him. "It's for a battery replacement," he said. Said Philippa. "I'll forward the details, of course." He knew she wouldn't ask. He knew that was why she had kept her job for 9 years. He had the mechanic, Dario from a shop on Roncesvalles, that Philippa swore by. Call Suzanne directly and tell her a customer voucher had been issued, a loyalty promotion, already applied to her account. He didn't know if she believed it. He suspected she didn't. He suspected she was too practical to look a gift battery in the mouth, and too proud to accept it if she knew it had come from him. He was right on both counts, as it turned out. She mentioned it on Thursday. "My mechanic says there was a promotion," she said. "Good timing," Callum said. A pause. "Very good timing. These things happen." She said nothing for almost a full minute. Then, "That was kind of you." He looked out the window at the city sliding past. "Don't mention it. I mean it," she said. "It was kind. But I need you to know that. I'm not looking for help. I manage. I know you manage. I just need you to know that. I'm not a project. I know." Another pause. Longer. The gardener was quiet at this hour, just taillights ahead of them, the lake to their left. "But the battery was going to be $400, she said. "And I was going to have to borrow it from my sister in Chicoutimi, and she's got her own things, so—" "Thank you." He found he didn't have an answer to that, so he just said, "You're welcome," and they drove the rest of the way in a silence that had changed, in some small but significant way, its character. He thought about what she'd said. "I'm not a project," for a long time after that. He thought about it because it was exactly the right thing to be worried about. He had resources and she had needs, and the gap between those two things was the easiest place in the world for a power imbalance to take root, disguised as generosity. He knew how that worked. He had seen it work. He had watched other men in his position do exactly that and call it caring. He tried to examine his own motivations with some rigor. What he found was this. He was not trying to make her need him. He was trying to be near someone who made him feel like himself. That was a different thing. He thought it was a different thing. He was not entirely certain. He called his lawyer, Hugh, not because he needed legal advice, but because Hugh was one of the few people in his life who would tell him an uncomfortable truth. He told Hugh, in general terms, that he had developed feelings for someone, that the someone drove for a rideshare company, that she was a single mother and he was her most frequent client, which created a complicated dynamic. There was a silence on the phone. "Well," said Hugh, "are you happy?" Callum considered. "I feel clearer," he said. "When I'm around her, I feel like I can actually think. That's not nothing, Hugh said. It's complicated. Everything worth it is complicated. That's not useful legal advice. You didn't call for legal advice. He hadn't. He'd called because he needed someone to tell him the feeling was real, and not just another thing his mind had constructed to avoid facing his actual life. Hugh, who had watched him navigate a 10-year marriage, and its unraveling with the stoicism of a man who'd learned to keep his interior life private, understood this without being told. Don't make it a transaction, Hugh said. That's the only advice I've got. I know. Tell her what you feel. Let her decide. I know, and Callum, yeah, don't be an idiot about it. He asked her to dinner on a Tuesday, not by text. He waited until she was driving him back from a late meeting, and when she pulled up to his house and the engine was idling and he should have gotten out, he said, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as. I'm not trying to be your client. I want to be clear about that. She kept both hands on the wheel. She was looking straight ahead. Callum, she said, you don't have to say anything now. I think I need to say something now, she said, because if I wait, I'll talk myself out of it. He waited. She turned to look at him. She had that direct, calm gaze she always had, except it wasn't entirely calm tonight. There was something in it, something she was working through in real time. I've driven a lot of people, she said. I've driven executives and politicians, and people who are having affairs, and people who are crying, and people who are very, very drunk. And most of them are just fares. I understand. But you, she stopped. You asked about Maddie, the second time you got in my car. You remembered she wanted to be a marine biologist. You remembered that. She paused. Nobody remembers that. People hear single mom, they process it and move on. You heard Maddie. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. Dinner, she said. Okay, yeah, but not somewhere that costs more than I make in a day, because then I'll feel like a project and I won't enjoy the food. He smiled. He hadn't smiled this way, he realized, in a very long time. It was involuntary, not a professional smile, not a polished smile, something that happened on his face without his permission. I know a place, he said. The place was a Vietnamese restaurant on Dundas West that had been there for 30 years and had never been reviewed in anything, and had 11 tables and was always full anyway. He'd been going there since his first year at U of T, back when he was nobody, back before Meridian and the Fairmont Gallus and the Rosedale House. His mother had taken him there after his father's funeral. He had never taken his ex-wife. He took Suzanne on a Friday in December. She wore a dark green blouse and the same scarf Maddie had made, the uneven orange and green one, and she looked more like herself than he had ever seen her. Not the driver, not the careful professional, just a woman in a green blouse sitting across from him in a restaurant where the soup was extraordinary. And the prices hadn't changed since the Chrétien administration. They talked for 3 hours. He learned things he hadn't known. She had spent a year in Yellowknife after nursing school, working in a northern health station, and she had loved it, the silence of it, the way the cold was different up there, total and absolute and somehow honest. She'd left when her mother got sick. She'd meant to go back. She hadn't. She learned things about him, that he had started Meridian in a 2-bedroom apartment in Scarborough, with a laptop and a business line, and a conviction so strong it had frightened him, because he knew that kind of conviction was either genius or delusion, and he wouldn't know which until it was too late. That his ex-wife had said, eventually, that she hadn't married a person, she'd married a project, and she was right. And he had spent 2 years since the divorce trying to understand what it would look like to be a person instead. How's that going? Suzanne asked. It's going, he said. I think I'm getting better at it. I'm not sure I'd know the difference from the inside. You asked about Maddie, she said again. That's the inside. He looked at her across the small table, the steam still rising from what was left of the soup, the noise of the restaurant around them easy and ordinary. I'd like to meet her, he said, at some point. If that's ever, let's see how this goes first, she said. But she was smiling when she said it. That's fair. I have very high standards, she said. Maddie's are higher. What does a 7-year-old need in a candidate? Patience, she said. The ability to name at least 3 types of shark, and you have to be willing to lose at Uno without making it weird. I can do that. Everyone says they can do that, she said. Almost no one can. It was not easy. He didn't want to pretend it was. He was not an easy person to be with. He was driven and occasionally cold and had a tendency to organize everything, including things that didn't need organizing. He was out of practice at the specific kind of attention that relationships required, the sustained, particular attention to another person's rhythms and needs. He had spent 15 years being very good at his job, which had left him in certain respects quite bad at everything else. But he was trying. He was more aware of trying than he had ever been. He called when he said he would. He learned to sit with silence without filling it. He learned that Suzanne did not need advice when she told him about something difficult. She needed mostly someone to acknowledge that it was difficult. This was not a thing that came naturally to him. His instinct was always to identify the problem and propose a solution. He was working on that. She was not uncomplicated either, and he thought that was part of it. She had walls she'd built over years of managing alone, of not asking for help, of calculating everything in advance because there was no safety net underneath. She was used to the weight of it. Putting some of it down required, he was learning, a kind of trust she extended in increments, so small they were nearly invisible. But she did extend it. One Saturday morning in February, he drove to Lansdowne without calling ahead, with a bag of groceries from the market on Roncesvalles and no particular plan, and she opened the door in socks and a flannel shirt and said, "How did you know I was out of eggs?" And he said I didn't, and she stood back and let him in. Maddie was at the kitchen table, drawing something enormous in marker on craft paper, a blue whale by the look of it, with scientifically approximate proportions. "This is Callum," Suzanne said. Maddie looked up. She had Suzanne's directness, the same level, unafraid way of looking at people. "Do you know how big a blue whale's heart is?" Maddie asked. "I don't," he said. "As big as a small car," she said. "Like a Fiat. That's incredible." "I know," she said. She went back to her drawing, then without looking up, "Can you make pancakes?" He looked at Suzanne. Suzanne pressed her lips together in a way that meant she was trying not to smile. "I can try," he said. "That's what my mom says she burns them," Maddie said. "She always burns the second one. But the rest are okay. I'll try not to burn any of them." "That would be impressive," Maddie said seriously. "Very impressive." He stood in Suzanne Lebel's kitchen on a February Saturday morning, burning the second pancake exactly, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly. It was quieter than happiness, less dramatic, more sustainable. It was something closer to rightness. The sense that he was in the correct place, doing the correct thing, being finally the correct version of himself. He had been a project for a very long time. He was learning, at 41, what it was to be a person. Maddie ate 5 pancakes and told him the names of 6 different species of deep-sea shark. He named 3 back. She looked at him with frank assessment and said, "Not bad." Suzanne caught his eye across the kitchen and smiled at him. A real smile. The kind she didn't perform, the kind she couldn't perform because it wasn't that kind of smile, and he thought, there it is. That's the thing I was missing. Not a thing you can acquire or build or optimize. A thing you have to be found by. He had been standing in a parking lot on Front Street in October, in the cold, unable to remember where he'd parked his car, and Suzanne Lebel's silver Hyundai had pulled up. He would spend the rest of his life being grateful for that night, not for the ride, for the fact that someone looked at him, actually looked, not at his company or his address or his title, and said, "Get some sleep. Whatever's keeping you up, it'll look different in the morning." It had. Everything had.